In 1986, a French graduate student carried out what some might say is the most important experiment on the power of love and quantum physics. And the experiment is going to blow your mind. Dr. Joe Dispenza claims that this experiment is also the foundation of an entirely new approach to human healing. He says that the insights let him recover from a spinal cord injury that doctors said was supposed to leave him paralyzed for life.
So when I broke my back, I had some significant amount of pain. I had a lot of fractures.
Dispenza claims that his quantum healing techniques heal thousands of people around the world, from everything from autoimmune diseases to anxiety to cancer, while at the same time also allowing them to reap incredible fortunes through the spiritual power of positive thinking.
There's information in their blood that causes them to be immune to viruses, any virus.
Will you see interdimensional beings? Absolutely. You have the brain chemistry to do it. Don't stop it.
And the science is so important because it helps us to take these ideas from pseudoscience. When you see people that have had spinal cord injuries or strokes or neurological problems, when you see them healed, you know then that it's possible for you.
Does this all sound too good to be true? Well, before you skip to the next video, you at least need to hear about the experiment. René Peoc'h's dissertation at the University of Nantes in France on the power of love in its rawest and most powerful form. And to give credit where credit is due, the idea was ingenious. As you might know, baby chickens imprint on the very first animate object that they see. Usually that's the hen that laid them, but occasionally they might see a dog or a farmer or literally anything else that moves and then follow it around wherever it goes.
Watch what happens when the duckling discovers its first moving object. After just minutes of exposure, the duck eagerly approaches and follows the toy everywhere, just as it would normally follow its own parent.
Now, Peoc'h presumed that the feelings that the chickens had is love in its purest form, and that maybe that power, that feeling of love, changes matter on a fundamental level. So here's what he did. He created a robot called the Tychoscope, whose sole purpose was to move around in random directions in a room. Think of it as like a Roomba, but with no practical vacuuming use. Now, under ordinary circumstances, you would imagine that the Tychoscope would, just like a Roomba, use that random motion to cover the entire area of that room, more or less in a uniform way. But Peoc'h had this trick up his sleeve. He believed that if the chickens imprinted on the robot and that the power of their yearning was truly, truly powerful and transcendent, it would influence where the robot went, attracting it in their direction. To give them just a little more incentive to yearn just a little harder, Peoc'h placed a candle on the robot's head and then turned off the lights in the room. Now, if you were a baby chicken, you'd probably want to be near the only light source, especially when that light source was the thing that you imprinted on and were in love with. Peoc'h hypothesized that the robot would respond by spending more time on the chicken side of the room than the empty side. Now, over the course of the year, he repeated 6 different related experiments almost 700 times. And well, this is what his data looks like. With no chickens present, the robot followed a random pattern. But when under the influence of this chicken love, this is what happened. I mean, those results are stunning, mind-bending even. To quote his conclusion, "It is difficult to invoke coincidence when this phenomenon verified during each of the 6 experiments." All right, sorry for the French accent. I had to do it. Anyway, think about it. The power of this chicken's yearning somehow altered the random number generator that was moving the robot around the room that had literally no consciousness behind it at all. What could be happening? Was this proof of the power of love, that it can warp the material world? Is it literally the law of attraction at work? Well, Dr. Joe Dispenza thinks that it all has to do with the quantum field. He devotes a chapter to this experiment in one of his best-selling books on energy healing, posts about it on Instagram, and regales his audiences time and time again about the astounding power of chicken imprinting in this 40-year-old experiment. Now, I have a lot of thoughts for what these particular results actually mean, as well as some subsequent scientific commentary on it, and I'll get to that soon. But first, it's really important for you to understand why I'm talking about this experiment at all. And if you haven't heard of him, who Joe Dispenza really is. Ultimately, he's a lot more important than the baby chickens. Dispenza is the most well-known proponent of quantum healing in the world, packing out stadiums full of people who have been inspired by his story of how he miraculously healed a broken back. He says that he can teach anyone to amplify their own innate healing powers to literally cure any disease. He occasionally teaches at Quantum University, which is an online program based out of a building in Hawaii that offers PhDs to people who want to learn to channel healing energies while wearing a mix of old-timey academic wizard-looking robes and magical pendants.
Quantum University is the world's largest institution of higher learning to provide online degrees based on the science of quantum physics.
He claims that energetic extraterrestrial light beings visit his workshops.
I started sensing presences in the room during our week-long events. So I started, out of the corner of my eye, started perceiving certain things. There was an energy in the room that I noticed, and they're very noble, and they're very interested in what we're doing. Many times in the beginning, they observe. They are along the walls, and they're not small. They're very, very tall, 3 meters, maybe more tall. I mean, they're beautiful and big. And they have this grace about them and this presence.
He is astoundingly popular among a certain set of spiritually inclined wellness devotees. LinkedIn is full of people boasting about their quantum healing degrees. But not everyone gives him perfect marks. It turns out that faith healing does have a few drawbacks.
Dispenza sent me into spiritual psychosis, and I actually had a psychotic break after doing his work for 5 years, and we need to talk about the dangers of meditation, the dark side of this community, and how he's not a doctor, he's not a neuroscientist, he's completely twisting quantum physics, and he's a scam artist.
Most of Dispenza's appeal stems from the way that he blends cutting-edge science with esoteric spiritual concepts. He teaches that the healing effects that he's observed come down to quantum field fluctuations, because at the end of the day, everything in the universe is just energy trying to actualize. And while to some degree, most physicists would agree with that particular statement, the relationship between energy and matter boils down to Einstein's most famous theory, E=mc². But their agreement would happen on very different terms than how Dispenza means it. The late great physicist and Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman once apocryphally said, "If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics." While physicists are trying to puzzle out the fundamental dynamics of matter and energy with supercolliders and high-energy devices, Dispenza believes that all you need is a little bit of love and some meditation to get to the bottom of things. Unlike the physicists, Dispenza believes he actually understands the universe in its truest and most pure form, because the universe is consciousness writ large. Now, a lot of people buy into this because quantum physics is legitimately strange. We don't really know what connects consciousness to matter, but that's a huge leap from acknowledging that telekinesis is real. Indeed, his entire MO is to start off with a scientific idea and then pile on his own idiosyncratic beliefs on top of it. To get a better idea of what I mean, I'm going to play you the trailer from an upcoming documentary of his called Source. It's Within You, that he's releasing soon in cooperation with a film crew that is also involved with the TV series Ancient Aliens.
The majority of people function in a state of stress, in a state of survival.
We use Western medicine and it does a bunch of things for us, but something's missing.
So far, agree with all of that. These are some standard things that we all understand are real problems in the world.
My name is Joe Dispenza. I run an organization called Encephalon. We teach people the neuroscience and the biology of how to change, how to transform.
How would I design a study that could
The article citing the Inner Science Research Fund says it gave $10 million to researching meditation, but according to its actual corporate filings, it only gave $600,000. And the organization is, to say the least, a little weird. I mean, it only has ever raised $4 million, mostly from Dispenza fans, and it looks like it was founded by this guy, Andrew Anthony Wright, whose bio is strangely mostly not on the internet, but is somehow also, he is an Emmy Award winner.
Capture any signal that meditation has on the body.
Red flags went off. How sciencey could that be?
There was tremolo in his voice, like, dude, we have an effect. There is an effect of meditation, and we can measure it.
Okay, so that video has introduced two new principal scientists. We have Tobias Moeller-Bertram and Hemel H. Patel. Now, Tobias is a pain specialist who also invests in a couple different health companies closely associated with Dispenza. The reviews on his pain clinic's website are interesting to say the least. Here's one that calls him evil incarnate, and another that says his clinic has caused her permanent damage. Now, I know those are just Google reviews, so let's talk about some other things. He also ends up in quite a few lawsuits, including against a crypto exchange in New York City and against Mammoth Medical over what I think is a patent dispute. So that's him. Meanwhile, Patel is an anesthesiologist at UCSD and ostensibly the person receiving the grant. Now, it's notable that all of the scientists in this project so far are in one way or another pain management experts, not virologists or cancer specialists, but specialists in the most subjective field of medicine. Pain management is fascinating because the pain, it happens in your head, even if the signals are coming from your body, which makes it very susceptible to things like meditation and the placebo effect. Moving on.
For the first time in the history of meditation studies, a group of scientists have discovered something really profound that's happening inside someone's body when they apply this formula.
Okay, that is just patently not true. It is not the largest meditation study by any important metric. According to the paper they linked to, they only had 200 survey respondents and 85 meditators at one of Dispenza's own workshops. There have been hundreds of meditation studies over the years, many with thousands of participants in them. Here's one that I found from 2018 that had 3,000 meditators who all had brain scans of their amygdala, which incidentally shrunk after meditation.
Doing is we are quantifying how powerful the mind is.
Okay. This is Michelle Poirier. Sorry that my face is in the middle of this. She's a super strange case. Okay, so she has a real PhD in molecular biology from 1998 out of California, and she even taught at Johns Hopkins University, which is legitimately impressive. But then, after about 10 years, she left the job to become a science writer and consultant before taking a job as a scientific coordinator at a company called Metamorphosis, which I have learned, according to her email address, is a life coaching company. So doesn't quite have the credentials that she started out with. Something weird happened, and I'm not sure what it was.
We apply the same protocols to run pharmaceutical study.
We have
never seen data.
Suggest,
that means we have data.
Suggests that you're changing.
Their brains look like people who have been meditating for decades. I have never seen data like this.
Whatever these individuals did was able to change the biology of a cancer cell in a dish.
Honestly, none of that is actually super surprising in the least. Lots of things change in petri dishes, which is why we have a whole method of studying called in vitro. And there's simply no test to say what brains look like after 10 years of meditation. We don't have a control group or baseline for that and constant studies. So that all seems really, really suspicious. Let's just finish this out.
By the end of that meditation, I didn't need the wheelchair at all.
He said, Charlie, there's no cancer.
Oh my God.
There was nothing, it was zero. Absent.
Date numbers.
Our data suggests 75% cause and effect.
It was like having a second chance at life.
Okay. So we're just literally in the faith healing section now. What does it even mean by cause and effect? How can that be delivered in a percentage? And come on, people getting out of wheelchairs, that is like classic faith healing.
Part of that community that believes in possibility, that believes we're greater than we think, more unlimited than we could ever dream. And all I offer people is my greatest understanding of the truth.
We have just scratched the surface. This is just the beginning to understanding our human potential.
Okay, so part of me is impressed because the message is so hopeful in a world where we all feel so helpless in the face of disease and imposingly impossible to navigate health systems, at least in America. Hey, breaking in here for a moment to remind you that what I am doing here, this sort of journalism, is community supported by my amazing crew over at Patreon. So if you want to be sure that this stuff still gets online, check out the links down below, and maybe you'll see your name in the credits at the end of this video and future ones that I put out. Dispenza, he offers inspiration. And that inspiration, well, there's probably some healing qualities that go with it. That's what the placebo effect is about, after all. But it's not all that interesting to say that meditation causes changes in the body. It's not big news. We've been seeing science that backs that claim up since at least the 1980s when, fun fact, my uncle did the first studies on improved coronary health with transcendental meditation. And there is a story to that. It is fascinating. And I wrote about it a little bit in my book, The Enlightenment Trap, but I cannot go into it because it will be a huge diversion that I'll have to share for another video. The changes that his film crew is suggesting, though, in that trailer are not nearly as exciting as the article that they actually published. Okay, so here's a quick summary of their actual findings. Meditation might be helpful for COVID infections as long as you also get ordinary medical care along the way. That was the study that they were actually doing. Most of their results hinged on survey results, like did you feel better about COVID or not? Like that is not an amazing data point. Any of their claims that this small finding means that they can cure anything with meditation is an enormous leap. It's just not based in science. In fact, this is part of the pattern that is actually Dispenza's main tactic. He funds studies and then misrepresents the results whole cloth to sell out conference centers. He extrapolates data where there is none to be found so that people will literally believe anything that he says because they don't want to bother to actually understand what the actual medical science said. Instead, you're just supposed to be wowed that people with medical degrees are on his side. Which is sort of funny because I will bet that a lot of people who flock to Dispenza are inherently wary of mainstream science and mainstream medicine. They both want the backing of science on one hand when it suits their purposes, and then believe that medicine is hogwash because Big Pharma is inherently corrupt. Okay, you're probably asking yourself now how the chicken study fits into all of this. Well, it's sort of the same thing. If the study, at face value, was truly an indication that love can alter the quantum field and change the random pattern of a robot's movement, then it truly, truly would be groundbreaking. It would deserve a Nobel Prize. The problem is, though, that science is not a single experiment with a flashy outcome. Experiments only matter when they're repeatable. I did a pretty deep dive on the internet looking for anyone who had actually repeated the experiment in more recent times, and I only found people who had tried and then failed to reproduce the results. I also found that statisticians took umbrage with the room layout, while researchers in his day asked to see how Peoc'h conducted his findings and had the robot move around the room, but Peoc'h was unwilling to show them his setup. And altogether, this leads me to believe charitably that he made some sort of error in how he collected the data or set up the experiment, or uncharitably that he fabricated the results whole cloth. Either way, if chickens do have the power to manipulate random number generators and control robots from afar, you would think that some scientist or engineer would have found a way to use these fundamental principles of the clockwork of the universe in some directly usable way. I mean, 40 years of provable psychic research, you would think that we'd be levitating by now. But we're not levitating. Chicken love is not even being used to redirect missiles away from mass destruction targets. It's not part of the Iron Dome over Israel, at least not to my knowledge. Which brings me back to Dispenza and the general quackery of the internet. Just because something looks like science doesn't mean that it is science. A scientific paper is meaningless unless other people can repeat it and get the same results. Dispenza takes a couple well-known scientific gaps where we do need more research and then inserts a general distrust of institutional science and medical authorities and then puts himself as the only person who can show you the door to healing. He believes that he is the mechanism of action, so he's no different than any other faith healer out there. And yet some might say that faith healing isn't hurting anyone, if it isn't outright causing harm. But this is short-sighted, because once people start believing in an alternate reality, there's no base to say what reality actually is. It's an opinion that no one can be right or wrong. Your theories are proving your facts. In a philosophical conversation about the meaning of life, it might not matter, but in human healthcare, it is life or death. And this is where things get really, really crazy. Because once someone starts to buy into Dispenza's chicanery, pretty soon there is no looking back. What starts out as thinly veiled spiritual mumbo-jumbo with a veil of science to cover it transforms into full-blown channeling of ancient spirits, alien communication, and the furthest reaches of disassociation from reality altogether. Of course, you are paying thousands of dollars for this along the way, and that is a real hit to many people's wallets. Now, remember how I mentioned his documentary was put up by the same people who produced the Ancient Aliens series? That's because Dispenza talks to aliens through his pineal gland.
As we activate the pineal gland, it acts like a radio receiver.
Now, is it really worth it for me to respond to this? Should I talk about how extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence? There's a lot to say about the physics behind space travel and intergalactic communication. And here's a plug for my wife's podcast, Wild Things Season 2 is all about the physics of how to do that, and I can't do justice to it here. So instead of giving you my own analysis of what he just said, I think this response from Erin Eber, who is a TikToker who describes herself as a frequency healer, is all you need to know to see where this is going.
If you're on Spirituality Joe Dispenza TikTok, you've probably seen these videos about the fact that there's blue aliens at Joe Dispenza workshops. I'd like to make a few comments about this. I have seen blue aliens in the past in work that I've done, specifically when I was in Lake Titicaca on the border of Peru and Bolivia. So I know they exist, I know they're out there. I also know that we do not need to work with aliens to heal. And I know that might sound obvious, but I want to say that because in the spiritual healing world, there's so much sensationalism. There are many, many beings available to us all the time to help us. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't need any of that. We can call upon source and higher frequencies without needing to work with beings. And one of the reasons I think that's important to know is because not all beings are benevolent. And I'm not saying anything about the ones Joe Dispenza works with. I've actually heard both reports from people. Some people think it's the greatest thing ever, and other people think it's really not okay. Personally, I don't feel comfortable working with beings pretty much at all. My channeling comes from a star that is very far away that carries a very specific frequency. At least that's how it was explained to me by my soul. But I pretty much only work with my soul and that frequency. And something I like to remind people of is that you just don't need things to be fancy or crazy or like very descriptive stories. You know, you don't need to like meet God in ayahuasca to have healing. It's all available to us all the time, whether we see it or not, whether we've put a story like aliens on it or not. You don't need to go to a $6,000 Joe Dispenza workshop to get the healing. There are so many healers out there that work at affordable prices, people channeling and working with very beautiful energy. You do have to get good at being able to tell who's working with what, which takes time and discernment. And I will end saying that when I first discovered my sound healing frequency that I work with, one of the ways I first realized what it was doing was because I did a sound in a group ceremony that had two people suddenly releasing entities that were attached to them. Because entities literally cannot handle that high of a frequency. And then those two people had to be worked with for like a good 45 minutes in order to make sure that the entities were cleared. One person knew the entity was there and the other person didn't. And I have noticed that my frequencies can really scare people if they have entities with them, especially if they don't want to release those entities. Because sometimes people have entities to make them feel more powerful. I think a lot of people in high positions in our world. Anyway, there's so much more I could talk about with this, but it's just like, don't fall into the sensationalism. Everything you need is available to you.
My goal is not to make fun of this lady as much as it is to say, when you abandon science, when you abandon the idea of cause and effect and let your theories rule the roost, then you have conversations like this. When you accept that aliens are visiting your workshops and there's no evidence of that you can, point to and verify, then you get the people saying that, well, maybe their aliens are better than your aliens. And it leads to how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin? Rather than going down this endless rabbit hole where theories are driving the facts, I think we need to take a moment to say that science and the careful observation of data that you get with, the medical industry for all its problems, and there are so many problems with the medical industry, things that just make me so angry. But the doctors are still the best thing we have, and I think we need to give the doctors their due and listen to what evidence actually says, because when you abandon evidence, you get this. Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And, it just means the world to me that you're here. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.